Thank you so much. It's just such a privilege to be here. Thank you to Bishop Van, to the Diocese of Orange County, and all the people who make this invitation and today possible. I have so much to say. I feel like speaking at warp speed. But before I go any further, I also would like to thank the Sisters of St. Joseph, and particularly on behalf of so many of us who have been educated by and served by the sisters all over. Clearly for myself, my education and all my career opportunities would not have been possible without the Maryknoll sisters. But I just want to say the most important gifts I ever received from the sister is that because of their love for us, their service to teach us, God became real in my life. And I think that that's such a tremendous gift of the sisters. We often think of their ministries, but behind all of it is the witness that they bring and make God's real because they make God's love real. So thank you very much for that. And just a few sentences about Catholic Relief Services. This is not the focus of our talk today, but I just want to say the acknowledgement that was just introduced, the fact that, I was named one of the 500 most powerful people on the planet. That was actually 1 year after I joined CRS, so that honor really does not belong to me, but that honor really belongs to CRS for 70 some years of work in the world, in the most difficult places. And not only the work, not just showing up, not just putting ourselves in the middle of misery, but also how we use our voice as the Catholic Church to call for justice and to call for the type of policies that really allow people's lives to be better. That honor actually belongs to you because Catholic Relief Services represent all the U.S. Catholics in the world. A lot of times people may not even remember our name, but they would say, those are the U.S. Catholics. So this is an honor that goes to the church for decades of a service, loyalty, faith, and compassion. So you should enjoy that. At CRS, we say that our work is a privilege because we are the hands and feet of Christ. Sometimes we feel like we are there to deliver on the promises that Christ gave when he said, I'm not going to leave you alone. And we are the ones to get a shot at making that promise real. We feel like we participate in the miracles of Christ every day. And we feel that the people who suffer so much, they are entrusted to us by God. And so it's a tremendous privilege. And for all of us at CRS, we tell ourselves that we have to earn that privilege by the best work that we can do. So I just want to say thank you. And before I leave that point, we work with a lot of people in really difficult situations. Syria is one of those difficult moments. The bishop in Aleppo, just try to imagine being a bishop in Aleppo. And recently there was a colleague out of Caritas Syria who just died from a bomb. The bishop of Aleppo, Bishop Udo, often said two things. Don't forget us. He said, don't forget us. And the second thing he would say is, if you don't have to pay with your life to be able to worship, then worship. Because these are the people who have to take major risks just to be able to live their faith. So let me just cut on to today's topic, and it's on business and ethics. I think I'm going to talk on business, and John Ellen is going to talk about ethics. No, I'm just really glad whoever the planning committee is, that I don't have to follow John Allen. So whoever made that sequence decision, I am most grateful. Okay? I'm actually going to begin with a little bit of a Jeopardy format. I'm going to give you the answers, and you're going to think about what is the question. So actually there are three things. It is not okay. It is my problem, and we can solve it. What is the question? What is extreme poverty? It is not okay. It is my problem, and we can solve it. Earlier this week, I was at the World Bank. We have been working with the World Bank for a couple of years, And it was a special program where the president of the World Bank, Dr. Jim Kim, had been working with about over 35 faith traditions on this whole issue of the moral imperative and the work that we need to do to end extreme poverty. Representing the Catholic Church is myself from Catholic Relief Services, Michelle Hua, who represented Caritas Internationalis, which is this association of 164 CRS around the world. And also Bishop Osa, who is the permanent observer to the United Nations by the Holy See. This week, there were 5 faith leaders and Dr. Jim Kim to begin the World Bank series of spring meetings, and it began with sort of this interfaith panel and himself on this whole issue of extreme poverty. The other faith represented, they can have 36 or 37 people on the stage, with myself, the Jewish Foundation, Islamic Relief, representative from the Baha'i tradition, and also the Hindus. First of all, how do we define extreme poverty? It means people who live on $1.25 a day. Now, ending extreme poverty at that level is nothing to write home about. We think that it takes about $4 a day to live to the point where basic needs are met, but just hold that number, $4 a day. Right now in the world, there are about a little bit less than 1 billion out of 7 billion people who live on $1.25 a day. 15, 20 years ago, there were 2 billion people operating at that level. Today, there are probably 2 billion people living on $2 a day. So this whole goal is extremely quantifiable. It says we want to take the percentage of people living on $1.25 a day from about 12% to about 3% in 15 years. Right? So you could absolutely measure it. That has become the primary goal of the World Bank. They also have a second goal, which is called shared prosperity, where they track the bottom 40% of the population in every one of these countries to see whether the income of that lowest 40% grow faster than the average economy. Now, for a minute, you have to sit back and say, this is the World Bank. This is not a charitable organization. It is not our general social service group. It is the World Bank, which has laid out those 2 goals. I think Jim Kim himself is interesting, Dr. Jim Kim. He is not a banker. He's never been in business. He was an anthropologist by degree, has a PhD in anthropology. He is a medical doctor. He ran the HIV/AIDS program at the UN. He spent a lot of time in Peru, and he worked with Father Gutierrez Gustavo in liberation theology. He participated in a movement earlier on, which is 50 years is enough, when the World Bank turned 50, which meant that he was completely against the World Bank. Today, and he was the president of Dartmouth College. So today he is the president of World Bank. He has set out 2 primary goals. These are the only 2 goals. And he got 188 member countries to buy into those goals, and both of them about extreme poverty. And he actually said, my operating principle is preferential option for the poor, the center of Catholic social teaching, embraced by the president of the World Bank. And he said, the person who would be most proud of me this moment is my mother, who is a theologian. All right, so I just want to tell these stories because my topic is called Business for Good. Now, we will probably disagree with World Bank on various approaches, but at least there is a common ground that we need to end extreme poverty because, as we know, extreme poverty is a scandal, as Pope Francis has said. It is a scandal because it is the bounty of God meant for everyone, but not shared by everyone. From that, I want to turn to a little vignette And it's actually of an actor you all know well, particularly if you've seen Gone Girl recently, and that's Ben Affleck. He recently, in end of March, did a testimonial at Congress. And his message in 7 minutes was that he has a not-for-profit. It's called the East Congo Initiative. And they work in the Congo, and they have funding from his own not-for-profit, from USAID, which is the US government, from the Howard Buffett Foundation, which is a private foundation, and the work is with coffee farmers. Because of violence in the Congo, coffee production now is only 10% of what it was at its height. And if you don't recover industry, livelihoods, and production, you cannot achieve peace. You cannot bring a country out of that type of misery unless you regenerate all of these productive activities. So he mentioned that coffee production is at 10%, and he mentioned Catholic Relief Services because we are the implementation partner. On the other side of it is Starbucks, that this coffee will be at that level of quantity and quality that could be sold at Starbucks. This is the new model, actually, for development. It is what's called public-private. Public includes NGOs like us, faith-based organizations, USAID, other governments, and also private providers such as Starbucks in this case. So that's what he talked about. And the goal is, of course, to restore it to 100%. Let me just give you a story of Ernesto. Now we go from Ben Affleck, talking to Congress. Now let's just travel for a little bit to Nicaragua, Central America, to a farmer's home. And this farmer's name is Ernesto. And Ernesto met with us. He's the poster boy for a program we ran, funded by USAID and Howard Buffett Foundation too. Ernesto was a maize farmer. That's the only thing he knew how to do. His father, his neighbors, and everybody grew maize. And he has a small plot of land, like a lot of these smallholder farmers. Except that his maize was not selling. Who does he have to sell to? His other neighbors. They have an oversupply of maize. He can't really get the maize to market because there are no good roads and there's no market for maize. And he borrowed money to buy seeds and chemicals at an interest rate sometimes as high as 12% a month. And so Ernesto's income cannot cover his costs. And he is always terrified when he hears motorcycles, because only bank collectors have motorcycles. And he knew if they found him, he was just one step away from losing his ancestral land and his home, and he will become a day laborer. He would have to go every day to some farm to see if he can find work, and he would not have a home. He would be a migrant. The journey for a person like Ernesto would become, he would lose his land, he moves to the urban area, he joined the urban poor, the urban unemployed, and his children will be very conducive to gang activities, and that's the beginning of spiral for the undocumented migrants. But so Ernesto was down and out. He was very worried, and he saw advertising for this program that we were running. This program, what it does is that it trains farmers to plant a completely different crop. In this case, passion fruit. So you think about from maize to passion fruit. Different planting methodology. They have to recover the land, different way of using water and chemicals and so on. So the first year of this program, we gave Ernesto the free seed to do passion fruit and massive, intensive coaching and teaching in terms of how you do that. He earned enough from that crop to retire his debt and to buy his seeds for the next year. When we met Ernesto, he actually has 2 motorcycles himself. His wife has a television, he told us, and she was happy, and his 2 children went to college. He was such a smart farmer, he recognized that if he built a greenhouse, instead of just planting seeds, but planting these seedlings, which are about 3 inches, he could take his yield from like 80-some% to 97% by building a greenhouse. A greenhouse required capital. And so he would also germinate seeds for his neighbors. And so he would be able to have revenue. So he started his first business, which is a seed germination greenhouse, in addition to his farm, and had much better production output. Along the way, I hope you finish your breakfast. To germinate the seed into seedlings, they put it in sort of these little containers, but they need very, very rich soil, high nutrient soil. In order to produce the soil, the women of that community created a business. They collected cow dung, and they used cow dung as a medium to attract worms, in these big vats of soil, and use the worms to till the soil in a way and add nutrients. And that became the business for the women, which was the medium for the greenhouse, which was another business. And I tell you this story because our work now, in the last year or so, CRS competed for and won several major grants. By the way, 85% of our funding comes from competing for grants. The large grants that we competed for, that are multi-year grants for this type of what we call agricultural value chain, will affect 35 million farmer years. We call it farmer years because sometimes the farmer participates for 2 years or so. It generally takes 2 years to turn this around. Think about that number, 35 million farmer years. We will be working in Africa. We will be working in Central America. We will be dealing with revitalizing the coffee crop in Central America where it has been blighted by a disease. We'll be working on vanilla. And the reason I say that is because all this work that we do, we need business as our partner on the other end. So in this case, the Ben Affleck example was Starbucks, but we work with Walmart because we need them to be able to buy from our farmers. We're working with Ben and Jerry's on 5 commodities: coffee, cacao, sugar, vanilla, bananas. And look at the way that they buy these commodities, how they source them. Because if they only buy from big farms, our small farmers will be lost. They will not be able to participate. And this is how poverty continues. So we really need businesses on the other end, and also our own thinking of how do we think about sourcing practice. And by the way, consumers' consumption preferences are also very important. Fair trade is one of those examples in order to lift people out of poverty. So the World Bank goal of eliminating poverty, which is really to take it to 3%, is not possible from just economic development. Economic development will take it to about 8%. The rest of it really requires this type of thinking, collaboration, in order to make it happen. Why is this important? This whole work with smallholder farmers and bringing business in. By the way, this is not corporate philanthropy. We are not looking for donations from business. We call this shared value. And that is, we want to go into the supply chain of corporations and say, we know you need to buy. Can you examine and evaluate your buying practices in a way that leave people better? This is called shared value. Why is this work important? Because there are 800 million Ernestos in the world. And, this is where poverty is. Farmers are actually the people who sometimes starve, and they're the poorest. The second thing is that Pope Francis said the markets have to work for people. They cannot leave people behind. They cannot make people suffer. And this is a way of actually engaging business and markets to work for the very poor. Why not? Why shouldn't they be able to participate as suppliers? Another reason for that is because we need the land to be productive. If the land is being used for growing maize, which is low quality and nobody buys it, the land itself as a resource is being wasted. And we will not have enough food for everyone as population grows if we don't make use of the land. And they have about 50% of the world's land under production, which means that 50% of the land is not productive. So it is also a question of this is moral ethics too. Another thing that allows us to do is we could actually watch out for the effect of climate change. How do we introduce climate smart agriculture? Right? So, and it's also good for business because this assures a stable supply. And all of this, in the end, is not just about justice, but it's also about peace. Another thing that I just want to mention quickly, in Central America, we are working with at-risk youth. Our first pilot program in El Salvador, we work with 5,000 youth from 15 to 25 years old. Okay? I have 10 more minutes, great. We work with 5,000 youth from 15 to 25. They're at risk because they don't have a job. There's not a structure to absorb them. We use a program called the Youth Builder Program developed in the United States. We're taking it international. It's about 400 hours of training for these youth, both life skills, literacy skills, work skills. And there is an 85% success rate. Success means they're either employed, they are running a little business, whether it's tortilla business, egg business, whatever it is, or they're going back to school. For this program to succeed, we work with over 200 businesses in El Salvador, because part of the training requires us to be able to place these young people as interns in these businesses. Without business, we would not be successful. And it's also a game for businesses because they need a labor force. And a great part of their labor force is also tangentially or deeply engaged with the gangs. And so people who graduate from our program they are also certified. And so our first round of this program, we spent about $5 million to train up 5,000 youth with an 85% success rate. So it's a little bit over $1,000 a youth. And this program runs several years working with these youth. We're now moving into our second phase, which is we're going to work with 10,000 youth with the goal that eventually we would work with all the at-risk youth in El Salvador, and that is 100,000 youth. But we have a map to get there. And by the way, this also requires us to think about clever way of how we finance this work. Because in the end, it's not just El Salvador, it's also Honduras, and it's also Guatemala. But I just want to give you this sense when you say business for good and the new way of changing people's mind, for business to look at development in a different way and for development to look at business in a different way. I remember when I first joined CRS, and of course I was the dean of a business school, when I talked about these concepts and so on, and we were actually experimenting with some of these in the field, but we need legitimacy and we need scale. That was a question to me. Carolyn, wasn't business the bad guys to start out with? And I said, let's just put that question aside. Some are and some are not. So I just want to use the next few minutes to talk about sort of the church teaching on sort of markets and business. If you think about just the last three popes, let's just start with John Paul II. In Santissimus Annus, one of his teaching letters, he actually said markets, particularly capital markets, free markets, are not bad in themselves. And you have to remember he, worked against the communist regime. He said they could actually do a lot of good. They're the platforms that allow people to be creative. They're the platforms that allow people to engage their skills so that they could have a living for their dignity. And they could become part of God's co-creators in this. So markets by themselves are not the problem. But he said, you have to watch out for three things. How do you come into your wealth? How do you share your wealth? And how do you hold on and identify yourselves with the wealth? So the teaching of Pope John Paul II. We have Pope Francis, which I just said, where very specifically he said, people do not serve markets. Markets serve people. markets cannot enslave people, and it cannot leave people behind, right? So that is his teaching. He didn't say don't have markets. He said, but watch the power of markets. Pope Benedict, in his writing, in his encyclical Caritas in Veritate, which is just excellent, a few major points. He said, charity is not only personal in nature, but it is institutional in nature, which means our economy, our political system, and so on, those are the institutional vehicles. Charity has to be a part of that. That it is not just a matter of personal and interpersonal interaction. The second thing he also said, markets itself is not the issue. We don't have to fear markets, but he said it's the moral energies of people which determine whether markets and business can do good. What did Christ say? Christ basically located himself in the very, very poor. And he said, the worth of your life, everything that you have ever done, is going to be judged by how you treat these very poor people. So as I end this, I have 5 minutes for a video. I just want to remind people, a lot of times in our society, and even people in business sort of sometimes accept it. And that is, we think about business as a necessary evil. But business should be a necessary good. This type of social vehicle in terms of exchange actually brings out our social nature and serve us. So business is a necessary good. It is not a necessary evil, but it depends on how we bring that about. That is the call for us as Christians, as the followers of Christ, and for those of us who are in business, to know how to use that as a force for good to honor God. And what I want to do now is show you a 5-minute video. It's actually now coming back to CRS work. I want you to have a sense of our work because this is your work in the world. And I want you to see sort of happy faces, that the problems we deal with, while there is great deal of suffering, bringing joy, bringing hope is our work. Not only is it necessary for us to do that, but it's actually quite feasible. It happens every day that we encounter the smiles, which is when we are the hands and feet of Christ, when you enable us to do that work, and that is the result. It's only about 5 minutes. It shows 3 sectors of work: emergencies in Haiti, children's education in Burkina Faso, and agriculture productivity in Madagascar. And actually there's a picture in there where it is a very humble home, but a wonderful home for someone who's lost a home. And someone in that family had written in chalk, God is good. And I took that picture. So please now bring up the video. Thank you very much.